Welcome to the UK Investor Magazine podcast, the latest on shares, markets and investments, now available on your Amazon Alexa.
Hello and welcome to the UK Investor Magazine podcast, now also available on the UK Investor Magazine mobile app. For today's podcast, we're going to be taking a deep dive into AIM-listed MicroSalt. The company listed in AIM last year. They offer a low-sodium solution to the cardiovascular disease crisis that we see in many countries around the world. And to lead the conversation today on the behalf of MicroSalt, we're very kindly joined by Rick Guiney, who is the CEO. Rick, thank you very much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me.
We spoke last year, Rick, and there's been an awful lot happening since. There's been a couple of announcements which are particularly relevant to MicroSalt recently. So I think a good place to start would be for those listeners that may not be aware of MicroSalt, a brief introduction, first of all, to the company, as well as yourself, please.
Sure. Well, my name is Rick Guiney, and I'm the CEO of MicroSalt. Very proud to have this position. I've spent most of my life in the food business in various companies, different sizes, big ones, small ones. So I have a deep experience in the food business. Our product is proprietary. We're the only folks in the world that can make a low sodium salt, true salt, without any other, without potassium chloride specifically. And this really addresses the health and well-being of everybody on the planet. And when you come to work for MicroSalt, you have to embrace the mission. Our mission is to help people live healthier lives through lower sodium. Sodium is one of the world's worst self-imposed health crises across the globe. And we have the tool now to allow food manufacturers to make food with a lower sodium level without making it taste bad. In the past, I'll give the food industry some credit. In the past, they've tried, but they've struggled to lower sodium because the tools just weren't available. We were forced to use other methods of lowering sodium, which created unpleasant flavors, which then necessitated flavor maskers and flavor enhancers. So you kind of walked away from your clean label in order to lower sodium. And that's obviously a problem on its own. So now, in the advent of MicroSalt and our technology, we can circle back, we can get to clean labels, and we can lower sodium all at the same time. It's an exciting time for those of us that are committed to improving the health and well-being of everybody, because we can really impact the food that we eat. 70% of the excess sodium that's ingested comes from purchased food. It's not so much what you put on at home. It's much more what you buy in restaurants, what you buy in the grocery store. So we're very proud that we have a product that can address that. And we're equally proud of our accomplishments in the market. We're asking the market, the industry producers, to change the way they do business. And we're very happy with the results of that effort so far.
Thank you. And we're going to discuss some of those results, if we may, Rick. And just a quick note to listeners, MicroSalt was actually voted as the AIM IPO of 2024 by our readers. So congratulations on that, Rick. And I'd like to just discuss now some of the reasons behind that, some of the results that you mentioned there. And I think it would be good because there's been quite a lot happening. There were some quite key announcements towards the end of last year. So I think it's quite a broad question to you, Rick. If you could provide an overview of some of the progress you made towards the end of 2024, if you may.
Sure. The sales cycle, when you talk about changing a large food company, is like, we're changing the direction of a big giant battleship. It doesn't turn quickly. And that's the case with the world's largest food manufacturers. They don't turn quickly. But we've been able to impact that change in a significant way. And in the third and fourth quarter of last year, we began to see the results of our sales cycle and our work within the research and development departments of these companies. We now have active placements with the world's largest food manufacturing companies in Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. And the exciting part about that is that these large food companies, they don't just make one item. They make several. They may make hundreds. And once you penetrate their research and development departments and become commercialized in one or several of their products, it only spreads. So we only have one way to go, and that's up. And up for us is exciting because we get to sell more MicroSalt, but that means that more and more and more people are enjoying the foods they buy, but with lower sodium. And the great thing about MicroSalt is that since it is real salt and it tastes like real salt and it has the functionality of real salt, the consumer may or may not even know that their food has a lower sodium level. It's just better for them. And this is a true story, and I always end our sales presentations with this. But I have a 16-year-old son, and my goal is that when he's 55, he doesn't have high blood pressure or some sort of cardiovascular disease. And the only way I can make sure what I can do for him is to make sure that the food he eats, the food that he buys now, since he's living with me, but as he has his own family, he can provide himself and his family with healthier food. Now, MicroSalt has a wide application, and one of the most exciting things, Jonathan, we did this year, we spent a lot of time and a considerable amount of resources on research and development to expand our ability to bring low sodium to different parts of the food industry. We've been able to create another proprietary version of MicroSalt that applies itself to the fast food industry, the QSR, FSR industry. You go in, we all go in, we order our meal, and we have French fries, and French fries come with salt. And until our recent evolution, that particular application, that particular market was a floating target. We couldn't quite get there, but now we're there, and we're extremely excited about our ability to bring what we're calling MicroSalt Premium to the food service industry. In addition to our standard versions of MicroSalt, which work really well in breadings and in topical coatings for crisps and in dough for bread and cookies and all those kind of things. But MicroSalt Premium, that addresses itself to what they call back of the house operations in restaurants and quick service applications, it's really exciting. So we had a really strong end of 2024. We're off to the races for 2025 with our current business growing and new products allowing us to address additional markets.
Certainly very exciting, Rick. Thank you for that overview. So, one of the things that I know, there was a release from MicroSalt recently, and this is particularly interesting looking from a regulatory perspective. And the FDA have announced disclosure rules. And I think this is something that's quite important to stress to investors, the importance of this, Rick. So I think, first of all, it would be good if you could provide an overview of what these new rules are. And then what does this actually mean for MicroSalt in terms of the conversations that you're having with potential or existing clients?
Sure, it is a milestone point for us and in the health for everyone who eats food that's manufactured in the U.S. The U.S. FDA has recently issued two, and I'll use the word rulings. I'm not a politician. I'll use that word. First, they defined the word healthy. In that definition, they included various levels of sodium. So if you are labeling your product or marketing your product as healthy, you now have a definition by which you must follow. And that's a big thing. There are a lot of words that really don't have a meaning, and people use them as marketing tools to build their business. And that's fine, it's acceptable. But now there's a definition of healthy, which includes sodium. So that's a big breakthrough for us. So anyone who's wishing to bring a healthy food to the market has to be aware that there are sodium level restrictions that come attached to that. And of course, that speaks to us because we can deliver a low sodium solution without impacting the flavor of their product. The second part of that is that the FDA has finally, I'll say finally, address the front of the pack applications for health warnings. On the front of the pack, they're suggesting that they're going to put 3 warnings: sodium, fat, and sugar. And just as a realistic story, we go into these big monolithic companies that have a number of items across a number of categories in the retail store, and we make presentations, and they love it. They see the application, but then they say, this is a big deal for us, Rick, and we're going to do it as quickly as we can. But right now, there are no government regulations driving this, so we'll put it on the list. Well, that's changed for us. It's made a big difference because now there's a timeline. Now, the U.S. has been far behind most of the rest of the world in sodium reduction regulation. Mexico, the U.K., even Canada and South America are far ahead of where the U.S. is in sodium reduction regulation. So we're happy that we're catching up, but we're happy that the consumer can expect a healthier product. It doesn't matter whether you buy a frozen food meal, whether you buy bread in the store, whether you buy an item out of the snack mix aisle. It's all eventually going to be dictated by sodium levels, and that's really fantastic. And from a business perspective, from our business, that's great. I mean, it's taking away one of the big walls we had to climb over all by ourselves. It's taken that away. Canada has got very similar regulations going into effect next year. The UK, as you know, Jonathan, already has these rules in effect.
Indeed.
Most of Europe is following that. And an interesting story, Mexico is pretty much the thought leader in this stuff. Mexico is a unique consumer market. It's geographically relatively small, with a lot of people condensed in a small space. So they can address their food supply, they can monitor their food supply, and they can control the food supply for their consumers. And that's a little harder to do in Canada, in the US, where there's a lot of empty space. You have here in the US, we have states that have their own set of regulations. So we've been a little bit slow, but very happy these recent rulings, and it just makes the future of MicroSalt even brighter.
Indeed. Now, of course, you say US catching up with rules that have been in places like the UK for some time. Of course, anybody going to a shop here will be familiar with the traffic light system that you'll see on food products, ranging from green, orange to red, depending on how much fat, sugar, and sodium is in that product. So that's obviously something that's going to be adopted by the United States. So what does this look like, Rick? From any research that you've done, if when a shopper goes into a store and these measures are implemented and they're looking at individual products, I mean, just how many products are going to be very high in sodium? And that would give, I think, some nice insight into what the total market could look like, or the market that you could address. What does it look like in terms of numbers there?
Well, the market is really large. Almost every item in the grocery store at some point has to be concerned about the sodium levels they are putting in their formulas. It all depends on whether you're making a frozen food item, whether you're making a fresh item. But I will tell you that there are a couple of numbers that can be staggering. Over 1 billion people across the world have high blood pressure, and almost half of those folks don't even know it because it comes from the food they buy in stores and in restaurants. 95% of the WHO countries, 185 out of 194, are going to miss the WHO sodium regulation targets. In the old days, Jonathan, there used to be a low sodium market and a sodium market, right? There were some potassium chloride-based products out there, and the food industry was trying, so I give them credit. So there were two things, but there's not two things anymore. It's one market. So the global market right now it's at $36.7 billion, US billion. as of today. And it's expected to grow at 5% between 2025 and 2034. So it's a giant market for us to address. It has applications in almost every possible food category you can think of. Soups, prepared soups, pastas, obviously bread and snacks we've talked about, but all the frozen foods, all your prepared meats, your deli products. Sodium in itself isn't bad. And I don't want people to think that I'm saying that, hey, you need to take out your sodium, because you don't. You need to take out the excess sodium. Some sodium is good for us. It's a matter of excess. And that's why we're very happy that we are real salt, but we're controlling the excess sodium that people ingest. We're not trying to tell anybody don't eat salt, because it's going to be extremely difficult, and that's not necessary. We don't need to do that. It's the excess sodium that's the issue. And the front of the pack labeling that they're proposing here, and the traffic light system you have in the UK, which mimics South America and Mexico, is very productive in alerting people what they're buying. Are you going to buy an item that's labeled as high sodium for your kids' lunches? Probably not. Now that you have that chance, but right now you don't have that option in the US. You don't really know unless you flip it over and do the math yourself. Hey, this is too high for my son's lunch, who happens to be in 6th grade. So it's a real big thing for us.
Fantastic. So you mentioned, Rick, when you go into these large food organizations, the reformulation process is like turning a battleship around. And some in the past, organizations have put lowering sodium on a list of things to do. But it'd be good to get some insights in terms of the conversations that you're having, the attitudes within the industry, and maybe a shift that you're seeing in food manufacturers' approach to lowering sodium. How's that been developing over the last year?
It's been changing rapidly. We came into the food business at just the right time. Consumers want healthier foods. Consumers read labels, and consumers believe what they read. I'll tell you, my mother never read a label in her life. She went up and down the aisles and grabbed that can of soup and never even thought that sodium level was an issue. But my kids, the first thing they do, and I think this is true for everybody, the first thing they do is they pick up an item and they read the back. And so that is a significant consumer change, which that habit draws attention to obviously the ingredients in the food, which therefore draws ingredients to sodium. So over the last, I'm going to say 10 years, that change has impacted the attention applied to sodium. So the big battleship guys, they know they're going to have to turn the boat around. And they've done some work on their own, preparing to turn the boat around. But then here comes MicroSalt with a much quicker way to do it, with a cleaner label, and they don't have to change the flavor of their food. That's the big thing. Sure, you can take sodium out of your food, but it's not going to taste good. And we're all consumers, Jonathan. We don't go to the store and buy things intentionally, knowing that it tastes bad. You might do it once, but you won't do it twice. So, in order for us to get everybody to be healthy, we need the food to taste good. So this is what MicroSalt brings to these big battleship type efforts. The research and development people now can get their heads around it, and they can say, okay, listen, I've got a cheese sauce that's got 6 components. I'm going to take 2 of them out, put in MicroSalt, lower the sodium, and have a cleaner label and the same flavor. Bam, that's a winner. Now, there's a lot that goes into that. I'm jumping over some science, and I'm jumping over some real world production issues. You're changing formulas. You might be changing how you mix things. You're obviously changing your supplier base. So there are some logistical things that have to happen. And the bigger the company, the more of those you have to conquer. But with the government tailwinds and the consumers wanting healthier foods, and that's not going away. Jonathan, we know that people aren't going to stop reading labels. They're only reading labels more. And as we go along, with the advent of QR codes, scan codes on the back of products where they can really do research, it's all good news for the health of everybody.
To finish off now, we've touched on some of the announcements at the end of last year, so some really significant jumps in your order flows. So I think the question here is a bit of a summary for investors and what they can look forward to in 2025, in terms of testing that's going on, and really, Rick, how excited you are about potential order flow coming in for the rest of the year.
We're looking at 2025 as our turning point. We've been spending a lot of time doing R&D, as I mentioned earlier, and working with these big companies. And now, towards the Q3 and Q4 of 2024, and as we race into 2025, we're seeing this stuff manifest itself in reality. We're seeing the QSR chains saying, you know what? I'm going to change the sodium level in my French fries. We're going to use MicroSalt. We're going to change the amount of salt in our crackers. We're going to use MicroSalt. So we have expectations that 2025 is really going to launch us from a company standpoint they always say things like the next level, Jonathan, and that has like no definition. But I got to say, we're going to go next level because the demand is there. And there's no ignoring it anymore. There's no saying, well, I'll get to it when I get to it. Well, that day has come. The consumers want it. The governments are telling people you want it. And if you don't do it, you're going to pay a price. An interesting note, there are some parts of the world that do it in reverse. Rather than saying to manufacturers, hey, listen, lower your sodium or you're going to pay a fine, they say, hey, lower your sodium and we will pay you to make it that way. So it's really interesting approach. So we're excited no matter where you are. If you live in Singapore, if you live in Sydney, Australia, if you live in Manchester, it doesn't matter. The issues are the same. Salt, MicroSalt is salt, so it has a long shelf life. So we can deliver our products virtually anywhere in the world without a shelf life problem. So it takes all the supply chain worries that come with the food business. It sweeps most of them right away. So we're very fortunate in that regard.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rick. As you've outlined there, a truly global opportunity for MicroSalt going forward. And it sounds like it's going to be a pretty exciting 2025. So look forward to having you back on the podcast before long. So Rick, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And thank you very much to everyone for listening. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed listening to the UK Investor Magazine podcast. Please do share the podcast, and we really value any reviews and comments you leave us in your chosen podcast player. The views presented by the hosts and guests of the UK Investor Magazine podcast are in no way investment advice, and please remember all investment involves risk.